One, go.
The Shifting American Dream. Colin Powell, the 65th Secretary of State and holder of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, wants to find the American identity as the dream that inspires generation after generation of Americans. But is what Rachel Gansar called the gleam of something brighter, big, and bold fading? According to a Pew Research study of 2024, 60% of people say no. Either it was never achievable or it is not achievable today. The American dream is fading for three reasons. Number one is historical factors. Number two is political. And number three is economics. The first thing I'm going to talk about is 9/11. Often 9/11 is considered a positive for American unity. For instance, in one of his state addresses to the Union, President Bush said that America was returning stronger and more unified. And he cited that the U.S. Congress passed a nearly unanimous vote on Public Law 107. However, in actuality, these are decisions driven by fear. Charles Ostrom, a professor at the University of Michigan, showed that in an analysis of Bush's approval ratings, they only increased temporarily and due to perceived threats, not even actual threats. And this unification, this temporary unification, came at a cost of certain minority groups. For instance, an FBI analysis by MIT professor Vivek Wald showed there was a 1,600% increase in Muslim-targeted hate crimes. That's 17 times more incidents following 2001. Exclusion does not equal the American dream. The idea of the American dream is that it is achievable for a large number of people. And with targeted racial violence, we disclude certain racial groups, and through events like 9/11, we have shown that the American dream has continued to ostracize certain groups. Second is recent political changes. I'm going to talk about two events, one of which is Obergefell versus Hodge, which is more commonly known as the Gay Marriage Act of 2015, and the Roe v. Wade overturn of 2022. Number one, on one hand, we have Obergefell versus Hodge, for instance, which has boosted the economics of the United States. For instance, a UCLA Dean of Law, Professor Brad Shaw, argued that gay marriage has boosted state and local economies by $3.8 billion. And it's created 45,000 new jobs per year. But on the other hand, more recently, we have the overturn of Roe v. Wade. As you can see here, this is a graph from the Guttmacher Institute showing what states have either banned or uncertain laws about abortion. And this has created problems with equitable health care. Number one is lack of complete care. A Duke resident, Kristen Karpas, stated her concerns. She says that for her as an OBGYN resident, she does not believe she can provide complete care without access to abortion. And she believes that incoming residents will have incomplete access to training and preparation. Number two, if abortion care is not taught or required, funding programs will decrease. And number three, we already have a lack of, we have health inequities geographically. There's a lack of rural access, especially here in Durango. We only have a level 3 trauma center, which cannot handle a lot of high-level trauma. And this lack of inequity continues to impact health. And although we've moved in a positive direction with Obergefell versus Hodge, we've taken an even bigger step back with equity with the overturn of Roe v. Wade. Perhaps the most discussed aspect of the American dream is economic achievability. However, 86% of young people, according to UCLA's survey, say that the top barrier to the American dream is finances. But what constitutes this barrier is health. People believe that it's difficult to obtain social mobility if you're either caring for yourself or caring for a loved one. Education in the United States is becoming increasingly expensive. Students fearing student debt are not attending college, and this is damaging social mobility. People say that there's a lack of mentors or aides in the fields. That could also mean lack of diversity in the field. And the number one complaint was the job market, which ties into current events. Millennials, according to a UPenn professor at Wharton School of Business, millennials are not buying houses and they're not having children, both things that are traditionally considered part of the American dream. And this ties into two central events. Number one, more recently, is the 2022 pandemic. There was a steep rise in job losses, and unemployment was at 13%, which is 9% above the natural rate of unemployment. Another commonly cited event is the 2008 recession. As you can see from this graph here, for all groups, even those with bachelors, the unemployment spiked heavily between 2007 and 2008 and was high above the natural rate of unemployment. This lack of economic opportunity also affects immigrants. According to an analysis by UCLA professor Vicky Mays, post-2008, it's harder for immigrants to obtain opportunities they sought relocating. That's either education or jobs. So these economic realities are damaging achievability of the American dream. So for young people, for immigrants. And in conclusion, 9/11, although traditionally considered a aspect of unity for the American dream, it was temporary unity created by fear and has actually worsened people's perception of achievability of the American dream and American safety. Number two, legislation. Although we made steps with Obergefell versus Hodge, there's been a decrease recently, and people feel political representation is an important part of the American dream. Number three, and perhaps the most important, people feel that the economic climate is not conducive for supporting the current American dream. If it continues to not be representative of the American people, the American dream either needs to change, or we need to identify what it is that is preventing people from accessing the same opportunities that were considered more commonplace when the American dream was first founded in the 1950s.
What information did you need before you began your research, and how did that information help shape your research?
So when I first started researching, I changed my research question a lot. I wanted to focus on just 9/11, but there wasn't a ton of evidence about that. It was a pretty narrow topic, and so I broadened it out a little bit, and I kind of had to do some really basic research, like, what do people consider the most important aspects of the American dream? What's the generational disparities in belief of the American dream? That's what I would say steps.
What advice would you have for other researchers who consider this topic?
Well, the American dream is an interesting topic because the idea of the American dream itself is kind of, it's a little murky. It's hard to define. And so I think what was helpful for me is I used a few sources to generate my idea of, the American dream, and then use that idea to base my research off of, and make sure that, I was comparing apples to apples, because then you avoid it more, to avoid the kind of nebulous area of, some people say the American dream is this, some people say the American dream is this, and so you can present a more consistent argument if you start from a more consistent base.